I am on an epic quest to 100% complete every single player Legend of Zelda game. So far I managed to beat both NES games, and I had a blast replaying A Link to the Past again. If you want to check out my playthroughs of those games, I made a playlist on my channel which I'll link up here. So now it's time for The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. This Game Boy classic has always been one of my favorite Zelda games. It's got just such a fantastic story and some really good dungeons. I'm going to be playing the Nintendo Switch version because I love the adorable graphics. Before I get started, if you enjoyed this video and want to see me complete the rest of the Legend of Zelda series, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing. And now, let's get started on our dreamy adventure across the island of Koholint. Since I'm playing the Switch version of the game, there's actually quite a lot I need to do to actually complete it. Of course, I need to get all of the heart pieces, beat all of the dungeons, including the color dungeon, get all the dungeon items, and get every map, compass, and big key. I also need to find all 50 Secret Seashells, get the boomerang, and get back whatever item I traded to get the boomerang, upgrade my magic powder, bomb, and arrow capacities, get all 3 bottles, get all 3 fishing lures, get all of the stone beaks, eat at least 1 green apple and 1 red apple, find all 10 warp points, reveal all the buildings on the overworld map, interact with every overworld owl statue, get the extra key in Key Cavern, and collect all 10 Trendy Game figures. Since this is the Switch version, I also need to complete all 24 chamber dungeons, obtain all 14 chamber stones, and get all 5 plus effect panels. I also need to catch at least 1 of every type of fish, and of course I have to beat the game. However, I actually need to beat the game without dying, as doing so reveals the secret ending, so this actually needs to be a no-death playthrough. Yeah, there really is a lot I need to do here, so let's get started. Once again, the game starts with Link sleeping. He wakes up in an unfamiliar house, that of Marin and Terran. Terran returns our shield, and I go off to find my sword. South on the beach, we find it stuck in the sand. I also meet a friendly owl who tells us that the only way to leave this island is to wake the windfish. So, taking my sword in hand, I set off on a brand new adventure. Before heading into the mysterious forest, I fell down the well to find a heart piece, and then into the forest. I went right away to get the toadstool, and I brought it to the witch. Now, with the magic powder in hand, I returned to the raccoon, sprinkled the powder on his nose, and poof, he turned back into Terran. With him out of the way, I was able to get the Tail Cave key. Now, before actually heading to Tail Cave, I decided to go fishing. I got a couple of heart pieces and the middleweight lure before getting the bottle, which was the reason I was actually here. And honestly, I really like the fishing in this game. You actually have to be very patient with the big fish, which I feel is probably pretty realistic. Since I still felt like delaying going into a dungeon, I went over to the Trendy Game. I got myself a 4th heart piece, making a full heart. I also grabbed the Yoshi doll while I was there, and I gave it away to start the trading quest. And then, on to Tail Cave. I always love the dungeons in this game. I think they're probably some of the best 2D Zelda dungeons. In particular, I really love these side-scrolling sections. Also, Goombas in Zelda? What's this? I got the first dungeon item, Rock's Feather. I also made sure to get the pointless stone beak. Remember, I decided that for completion, while I need to collect the beaks, I don't actually need to speak to the owl statues in the dungeons. One of the peculiarities of this game is the behavior of the compasses. In Link's Awakening, they make a sound when you enter a room that has a key in it. And I don't get why they did that, as I don't really think it's that necessary. And I believe that this is the only game that does that, though I don't remember if the Oracle games do or not. Part of what makes dungeons in this game so cool is that this is where dungeon mini-bosses were really introduced to the series. Sure, there were mini-bosses in a couple of dungeons in Zelda 1 and A Link to the Past, but this is where they really took on the form that they've had in the rest of the series. Each dungeon has a mini-boss that you have to fight, and it's often guarding either the dungeon item or the nightmare key. Tail Cave's boss is annoying. Stupid Moldorm. Now, I mentioned in my Link to the Past playthrough, but I hate Moldorm. He's just so annoying. I did manage to beat him without dying, but boy, it was a good thing that I had a fairy in that bottle that I got from fishing. Well, just like that, the first instrument was obtained. Now, when I got out of the dungeon, Mr. Owl tells me how the instruments are needed to wake the windfish. Also, hoot indeed. I soon got the first secret seashell. There are 50 of them to find here, so it's going to be kind of difficult. Also, I want to point out how stupidly expensive the shop in this game is. Now, I know you can steal an item, but I don't want to do that, as going back into the shop after results in instant death. I spent a little time fishing to earn rupees, and then I went on to the Moblin Cave. On the way there, I got a heart piece, and I spoke to the first owl statue. I believe there are 9 overworld owl statues, and these I do need to talk to. Their eyes light up blue when you talk to them, so it's pretty easy to keep track of them. Well, into the Moblin Cave I go. And boy, this is just so easy. And just like that, Bow Wow was rescued. I went to try and visit Dante since I was here, but evidently it was too early and I just couldn't visit his house yet. So, back to Mabe Village I went. I wanted to buy the shovel, so I tried getting rupees from Trendy Game. And boy, it's annoying getting rupees from that. But eventually I did get enough for the shovel. I did a little seashell hunting and some trading. I also got the second overworld owl statue before heading to Bottle Grotto. Again, I made sure to get the useless stone beak here. Now, this dungeon is cool for introducing another familiar enemy, Shy Guy. The mini-boss here is a Hinox, and boy, this guy is just so annoying. If you don't move out of his way fast enough, he'll pick you up and throw you, which, while cool, is really annoying. Well, I beat him, and then I went and got the power bracelet. Now that I had that, I actually left the dungeon early. I headed south and got Crazy Tracy's medicine. This revives you if you die, so it's nice to have just as extra insurance. With that, it's very unlikely that I'll ever get a game over. While I was out and about, I went and got some more heart pieces, getting enough for a new full heart. I also got the magic powder capacity upgrade before returning to Bottle Grotto. Yet another example of how cool the dungeons in this game are is this room here, where you have to defeat the enemies in the correct order. It's just neat. Alright, now, boss time. This guy's very unique. You can't hurt him in the beginning. You have to wait until he hides in his bottle, and then you knock him over and throw the bottle against the wall until it breaks. Once his bottle breaks, you can actually hurt him. And really, this is actually a very good fight. It's very unique. Well, with that dungeon being complete and the second instrument being obtained, I returned Bow Wow, and I went back to Trendy Game, where I got a perfect grab on this Goomba statue. Like, look at that. That was awesome. I also got a Chamber Stone, which is useful. There are 14 of these I need to get for 100%, so it's good to start collecting them now. Before leaving the village, I bought some bombs, and then off across the prairie I went. My first goal here was to head to the Seashell Mansion, where I got the first reward, which was a heart piece. I really wish the Seashell Sensor was first, that would be way more helpful. I then headed towards the castle, where a monkey helped me build a bridge. And it's actually kind of funny, this is the second game in a row now where a monkey helps Link. Well, into the castle to collect the golden leaves. Now, this generally isn't too bad, although I will admit I always hate playing whack-a-mole with this soldier. Oh, and this stupid ball and chain soldier is just so annoying. Well, with the leaves in hand, I went and gave them to Prince Richard, and then I went into the whole maze to get the slime key. On the way, I got this heart piece, and I think I actually got this early, as I think you're supposed to have the Pegasus boost to be able to get it. Instead of going straight to the next dungeon, I decided to get distracted. I first went to visit Dante, and I started doing the chamber dungeons. Of course, I don't yet have a lot of room, so I can really just do the first one, and then I headed out. Now that I had the bombs, I headed back to Tail Cave, where I got the chest that I couldn't get before. It was a seashell, which is always welcome. I also spent some time exploring the overworld, as it was late in the evening at this point, and I didn't want to start the next dungeon until the next morning. I met Terran and gave him the stick, and I love the look on Link's face as he watches Terran here. I found Seashell number 15 and got another overworld owl statue. And now, Seashell 15 is the one I was really excited to get, so I immediately headed right over to the Seashell Mansion, where my reward for finding it was the Seashell Sensor. This makes a sound whenever you're near a seashell, and it's super helpful. Anyway, time for the next dungeon. Now, I love that, as it's called Key Cavern, the map looks like a key. Now, as I venture in, I come across one of the most annoying things ever. Locked rooms that only reward you with a key. What's even the point of that? I got myself into quite a predicament here. This bomb just did not want to explode. Oh, and speaking of bombs, can we take a moment to appreciate how stupid the Dodongo snakes look? They're ridiculous. Anyway, I got past them no problem and got the Pegasus boots. Now this is easily my favorite item in this game. It's just so satisfying to use. Well, I reached the boss door without any problem, and I have to ask, what is the point of this extra key? Seriously, I'm pretty sure there are no doors for it to unlock. It's just extra. I don't know. Anyway, boss time. And this one is super easy. So, without much difficulty, I got the third instrument. One of the first things I did now that I had the Pegasus boots was to go and knock some red apples off of a tree to eat. It seems kinda ridiculous, but it is technically part of completion. And while I was in the area, I went into this cave and used my new Pegasus boots to get the heart piece hidden inside. Next up, I headed back to Mabe Village, where I visited the Dream Shrine in order to get the ocarina. And of course, I talked to Marin and learned the Ballad of the Windfish while I was there. And speaking of Marin, I had mentioned that I needed to complete the game without dying in order to unlock the secret ending that features her, so I decided now would probably be a good time to visit the Color Dungeon and get the blue tunic. I don't know why, but I had a really hard time with this mini-boss. A lot of my attacks just wouldn't hurt him. But besides that guy, this dungeon really isn't a problem. These color switch puzzles are generally pretty easy, and the boss is stupidly easy. So I was able to beat him with no problem, and I got the blue tunic. This cuts the damage you take in half, so it's really useful if you're actually going for a no-death run of the game. Now feeling a lot more confident, I headed south to the animal village. I gave the bear my honeycomb in exchange for a pineapple, and I found some green apples, which I also needed to eat for completion. Now, seeing as I couldn't actually get into the desert without Marin, I headed back out of the village, but instead of going to find Marin, I decided to first head up Tall Mountain. I got this heart piece, of course, but my main purpose in coming here was to give the pineapple to the climber. That being done, I headed back down towards Mabe Village, and of course on the way I collected any seashells that I found. I found Marin on the beach, and I enjoyed that scene of sitting with her. I also stopped for this secret scene on the cliff with her, which I just love. I stopped in Mabe Village for a couple of things. First, I had to take Marin to Trendy Game, where she somehow grabs the Trendy Gamester. And I took the time to get enough rupees to buy the bow. It's stupid how expensive it is, and I know I can steal it, but if I did, the next time I entered a shop I would die, and since I definitely needed to go in the shop again, I had no choice but to pay full price. Alright, on to the desert. And as Zelda deserts go, this one is kind of lame. It's so small and there's really not that much interesting here. There is an overworld boss to get a key, but it's really not that hard. Of course, while I was there, I made sure to get any seashells in the area. This one with the walrus took me ages to find the first time I played this game. Once again, instead of going right to the dungeon, I decided to go and run a few errands. I delivered the letter from the goat, and I gave Grandma Yahoo her new broom. This left me with the fish hook, which I couldn't do anything with until I got the flippers. Since I was in Mabe Village, I decided to take some time to play some Trendy Game. I got a heart, a spiny, and a boo. And I must say, getting rupees from this game sucks. On my way to use the fish key, I stopped at Dompe's to do some chamber dungeons. Oh, and pro tip, you should design your chamber dungeons with a lot of chests and very few doors. That way, there are a lot of chests with rupees that you get to keep afterwards. Well, I used the fish key and entered the dungeon. First off, I have to say that I love the music in this dungeon. I love that you can hear the old-fashioned 8-bit theme underneath the modern arrangement. Like most of the dungeons in this game, this was really quite simple. But besides being simple, it's kind of boring in my opinion. Yeah, it's a little neat how the key falls down to where you can't reach it, and this light puzzle is kinda cool, but overall this really is just not a very memorable or exciting dungeon in my opinion. And of course, the swimming makes it worse because swimming feels so slow in this game. And not only is the mini boss of this dungeon annoying, but the actual boss of the dungeon is, in my opinion, one of the easiest bosses in the entire series. Which of course means I defeated it with no problem, and I claimed the 4th instrument. My top priority as soon as I got out of the dungeon was to get Mambo's Mambo. This song is super useful as it lets you warp at any time from anywhere. Now that I could swim, I decided to swim under the bridge to give the hook to the fisherman, where I got the necklace that I then traded to the mermaid for one of her scales. At this point, the ghost that was following me around was starting to annoy me, so I took him to his house. And then, on the way to his grave, I took a little detour to get the bomb capacity upgrade, which is super useful. And then onto his grave where he gave me the 2nd bottle. Alright, on to dungeon number 5, Catfish's Maw. This dungeon is really fun because you beat the Stalfos and, oh no, he took the item. You then have to chase the Stalfos around the dungeon and defeat him a bunch of times until he drops the dungeon item. Side note about this dungeon, you have to go surprisingly deep into it to get the map. Well, I fought the Stalfos, and these fights are just so easy, but great, I got the hook shot. With that in hand, I actually decided to leave the dungeon, and this is because now I can use the hook shot to get the magnifying lens, and this is mainly used to get the boomerang, which is super powerful in this game. So I did that, and of course I bought back the item that I had traded to get the boomerang in the first place. Instead of going right back to the dungeon, I decided to go looking for shells, since I was almost at 30. And I got it, but unfortunately the reward was only a chamber stone. Kinda disappointing. Alright, now I headed back to the dungeon, and I have to say, oh my goodness I hate Goma in this game. He's just awful, especially since there are 2 of him at once. Here's a good tip for whenever you're playing this game. Say you're deep in a dungeon and you need to get back to an earlier part. Like here, I wanted to get back to the room where I fought Goma, which had a warp point in it. Well, if you play Mambo's Mambo anywhere inside a dungeon, you'll instantly be able to warp back to the entrance to the dungeon. So I used that here, and then I took the warp point back to where I wanted to be. Pretty cool, right? It's strange, no matter how many times I play some of these games, I somehow always manage to learn something new. And here I learned that you can evidently jump on Cheep Cheeps to defeat them in this game. I mean, I guess it kinda makes sense seeing as they're Mario enemies, but still, I actually never tried that before, so I didn't know that you could. The boss in this dungeon is quite a unique one, and I usually actually have a really hard time with it. You need to use the hookshot to pull Slimeal out of the wall to expose its weak spot, and for some reason, I just always struggle with aiming the hookshot properly in time. However, with a lot of patience, I managed to defeat it without dying, so I claimed the 5th instrument. After that tough fight, I really needed a bit of a break, so I went to the fishing hole. And I always forget just how difficult it is to catch the bloopers and Cheep Cheeps in this game. They break off your line so easily, especially the Cheep Cheeps. I did manage to catch a blooper before I ran out of patience. Since I was still unwilling to go to the next dungeon, I continued to do some odds and ends around the overworld that I needed for completion. I went to the River Rapids game where there were actually a bunch of prizes to get. In general, they weren't really that hard, with the one exception being the Chamberstone prize. You have to score 30 seconds or less in the race, and it was so difficult and so stressful. I ventured up Tall Tall Mountain and explored there for a bit, where I managed to get the arrow capacity upgrade, which happened to be the last upgrade that I needed. Side note, why did I have such a hard time with this sliding rock puzzle? It doesn't look like it should be that hard. Eventually, I decided that I actually needed to make some progress on the story, so I went to the ancient ruins where I would get the key for the next dungeon. However, while I was there, I actually found Secret Seashell number 40 in the hidden staircase. So I went back to the Seashell Mansion and claimed my prize, which was the Koholint Sword. And I love this sword because besides being more powerful than your starter sword, it lets you fire sword beams, which is super helpful. Alright, well, back to the ruins where I fought the Armless Knight, and this guy is not nearly as cool as he is in A Link to the Past. Now, here's why I think this is one of the better stories in the series. In this shrine, we learn that Koholint isn't real. If the Windfish wakes up, the whole island and all of its inhabitants will disappear. Link has been exploring this island, meeting the inhabitants and learning about them, and the first time I played Link's Awakening, I had really fallen in love with this cute little island by the time I reached here. Learning that in order to beat the game I had to destroy this island made me feel so sad. This sadness is reinforced by the music in the Face Shrine, which is the dungeon you visit immediately after learning that the island is just a dream. The music is sad and slow, reflecting how Link now feels conflicted about his mission to wake the Windfish. Well, I had a quest to complete, so for the time being, I put the island disappearing out of my mind and ventured into the dungeon. I got the power bracelet super quickly, which was nice. Oh, and this dungeon actually has an improvement over A Link to the Past in it. When playing that game, I complained that your shield doesn't block the flying floor tiles. Well, here your shield blocks them easily. I soon reached the most annoying mini-boss in this game, Rover. He throws a big black ball at you and you need to grab it before you can retrieve it and throw it back at him. It's just tedious and annoying. It is nice though that this dungeon has a lot of rupees in it. And I also really like the staircase that leads into the middle of the River Rapids course where you can get a Secret Seashell. Fittingly for the Face Shrine, the boss here is a big face. Now this guy is pretty easy, all you need to do is drop some bombs on him. After a bunch of hits he's defeated. However, he does reiterate the warning that you got in the ancient ruins, that waking the Windfish will cause the island to vanish. With instrument number 6 in hand, I headed right back to Mabe Village, stopping to get this piece of heart in this cave near the graveyard. And then, when I got back to Mabe Village, I remembered that Trendy Game sucks. I got so lucky with the blooper, however, not so much when it came to the Shy Guy. Like, seriously, what was that? I didn't feel like wasting more rupees on Trendy Game, so I went and failed at fishing for a while before going to Dampe to do some chamber dungeons. This was primarily to get the last bottle, however, I also did get a piece of heart from completing the 2-shovel difficulty. In order to get the bottle, you need to complete the Heart Shortage Chamber Dungeon. This one is annoying since you only get 3 hearts to beat it. The easiest thing to do here that I found is to make sure there are very few chests, preferably only 1, and no locked doors. That way you can get the boss key really quickly and you can avoid going in most of the dungeon. I did that and I easily got the bottle. Next up, I headed over to the Sign Maze. I got the final ocarina song from Mamu, also known as Wart, and then I headed to Mabe Village to bring the bird back to life. I used him to get the bird key and then I headed to Eagle's Tower. This is such a cool, unique dungeon. You have to navigate around the different rooms with this ball, which you then use to knock down these pillars to lower the top of the dungeon so that you can reach it. Plus, this dungeon has an evil Kirby in it, which I just think is awesome. Well, I made my way through the dungeon, completing the easiest Hinox fight ever, and obtaining the Mirror Shield. And I have to admit, I prefer how the original shield looks, but I need the Mirror Shield, not only for completion, but to actually beat the game, so oh well. This mini-boss is deceptively hard. It really shouldn't be, as all you need to do is defeat these flying idiots without any of them escaping off screen. But for some reason, I had a really hard time with it this time. On the other hand, the eagle fight was way easier than I remembered. I know I used to struggle a lot with this, but this time it just felt really quite straightforward. And just like that, I had instrument number 7. This time, I decided to just head straight for the next dungeon, as it was the last one I needed before the finale. So I headed west, rescuing Marin as I went, of course. Now, this dungeon is really cool, as to enter it, you actually need to do an overworld boss fight. Granted, it's not really that difficult, but it's still really cool. Then, into Turtle Rock I go. And this is a fun, though kinda confusing dungeon. I just get very confused because there are so many staircases leading all over the place. But, besides my confusion, this is generally a pretty good dungeon. I especially like these bridge builder puzzles, where you need to control this moving block to fill in all the spaces over the chasms. Throughout this dungeon, you refight a bunch of the mini-bosses from the other dungeons in the game, and I love this because they are so much easier to deal with this time around. It really makes you feel as though you've progressed as a hero. I remembered to leave the dungeon through this back door to get the last warp point in the overworld, and then back into the dungeon where I did the stupidest Worm Dodongo fight in the series. Seriously, you have so little room to both maneuver and to throw the bombs, it's so annoying. Though, that's not nearly as annoying as fighting this boxing guy. He's so hard to beat. I don't know if there's some sort of trick that I'm missing, or if it really is just as simple as dodge and attack. Whatever the case, I hate this guy. But I managed to beat him without dying, and I claimed the last item, the magic rod. The last bridge building puzzle in order to get the nightmare key was so hard for some reason. I just kept turning slightly too early and having to restart. I eventually got it, and I got the key, and then on to the boss. Hothead isn't too difficult. Just hit him a bunch with the magic rod, and when he's bouncing around the room, you can also hit him with your sword. And just like that, I got the last instrument. I did have a few more tasks to do before the final boss. I went to Trendy Game to get the rest of the figures. However, evidently the Bow Wow figure doesn't actually ever appear until after you've beat the final boss. I had to look it up. So unfortunately, I couldn't finish that just yet. So I went to get some missing seashells, heart pieces, and owl statues. I did some chamber dungeons until I got the final heart from Dampe. Then off to the fishing pond. I caught Old Baron, which was pretty tough. But look how cute this guy is, he's adorable. I got 2 chamber stones for that, which was awesome. I also finally caught a Cheep Cheep, and oh my goodness, these guys are so hard to catch. Catching them got me seashell number 49, and luckily I remembered where number 50 was. Down south near Tail Cave there's a tree, and if you ram into it with the Pegasus boots, a seashell will appear. So I went and got that, which was the final seashell. I immediately went to the seashell mansion to get the final reward. I got a whole bunch of rupees and a chamber stone. The rupees were pretty nice since I still needed to buy some chamber stones from the shop in the village. At this point, I was basically ready to fight the final boss. I took a moment to check that I had identified every building on the map, and I double checked that I had indeed found every overworld owl statue. And then I went and got directions to navigate the egg, and I headed north. I played the instruments and entered the egg. With the directions in hand, I quickly found the boss room and I jumped in. Luckily, I've played this game a whole bunch of times, so the final boss really wasn't that hard. The only actual difficult part was the Ganon section, but even that wasn't too bad. So, without much trouble, I defeated the nightmares and woke the windfish. The ending of this game is always sad, as we have to watch Gaholint disappear. But still, I felt good, as I had done all that I could before the credits, and I managed to beat the game without dying, so I got the secret ending with Marin flying away as a seagull. I did still have a few things to complete, unfortunately. I went to Trendy Game and I got the Bow Wow figure, which was the last one that I needed. I then returned to Dampe's shack, where I got the Plus Monsters effect panel. The other Plus effect panels you got from doing other things like completing specific chamber dungeons, but this one you needed to get all the figurines to get, and unfortunately you can't do that until after beating the game. Then it was just a matter of completing chamber dungeons and buying chamber stones. Well, eventually, after spending a lot of rupees, I bought Chamber Stone 14, which was the last one. So I immediately brought it over to Dampe's shack, and I completed the last chamber dungeon. And that's it! It was a lot of work, but I successfully 100% completed The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. That was a ton of fun. I always love playing Link's Awakening, but I've never actually tried to 100% complete it before. I will admit it was a little stressful in the beginning trying not to die so I could get the secret ending, but once I got a few hearts in the blue tunic, it really wasn't that bad. Really, the only annoying part was the fact that you couldn't get all of the collectibles before fighting the final boss. I don't know why Nintendo decided to do that, but that's not the end of the world. This is still a really fun game, with good dungeons, a great story, and collectibles that weren't too tedious to collect. This game really is a masterpiece, even on the original Game Boy, and if you haven't played it before, I highly recommend you give it a shot. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Now, I know this video took me a long time to complete, but despite that, I am still planning on completing the rest of the series. Please let me know in the comments which game you're most looking forward to watching me complete. Well, until next time, so long!